Yay. So far it's still us though, right?
Nope, we've got
Oh, I
people
see.
starting to come on. Good morning, everyone.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. I can't see the people who are on so far, but that's okay.
Yeah, we'll give everyone a few minutes to jump on.
Hi, everyone. We'll start in just a few seconds.
Let's give it a few more minutes and then we will get started. I know it takes a few minutes to get on, but in the meantime, thank you everyone for joining us during your lunchtime today.
All right. Hey, everyone. I think we'll get started. I know a few people will probably still hop on, but I just want to say hi, welcome. Thank you for joining our first webinar of Wellness Week. This is our first Wellness Week that we're doing here at BBB Cleveland because August is actually National Wellness Month. So today we have Andrea Hinojosa. She is a registered dietitian, a licensed nutritionist, and she's the founder of Honest Health and Wellness. She's dedicated to accessible and individualized nutrition healthcare, and she specializes in diverse populations. Andrea is also a member of our BBB Junior Board of Directors. If any of you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or you can wait until the end, and Andrea is going to open it up to discussion and questions. All right, take it away, Andrea.
All right, so hopefully you can all hear me, and I'll just ask if Katie, if I can get that permission to share my screen again while I do that. So I'll try to make this very laid back at the same time. So feel free, like Katie said, to add your questions in the chat, relax, get yourself comfortable. I know it's your lunch break. And then I will share my presentation once I should be able to. Let's see if I can right now. And then Katie, just let me know if then you're able to just see the presentation.
We can see it.
All right, and then everyone can still hear me? Perfect. All right, so I'm going to talk about what is called our top tips for workplace wellness. Before I do, I know Katie already introduced who I am, so welcome everyone. I'll dive into some strategies just to maintain wellness in the workplace, focusing on concepts that go like beyond just basic nutrition. I feel like most folks usually know what a fruit is, a vegetable is, and if you don't, that's okay. We can talk about it. That can certainly be a question. There's no shame there. So I do want this to be a safe space and ask any question that comes to mind. And then keep in mind that some folks might be having lunch today, and I know some questions sometimes are not lunch friendly. But our session today will cover a brain-gut connection, the nervous system response, and intuitive eating movements. For myself, some disclosures and identities. I am a dietitian, Latina, Indigenous, queer, and neurodivergent, and work with a lot of populations who fall under these categories, in particular, instead of dietitian, healthcare workers. So I do see a lot of people who are also doctors or nurses or teachers or are serving in some form here in what would be, I guess, planet Earth, right? All right, so here's a little example here for anyone who's visual on our agenda. Again, I wanted to give more space for questions because I do know that a lot of this that I'm talking about, each kind of category can be its own 3-hour presentation essentially. So I'm going to kind of dive in for us, and I'm going to actually start straight to brain and gut connection. So brain and gut connection. First, it's important to kind of understand the connection between these two. It's not talked about too much, and I would say more and more research is still being done, but in the last like 10, 20 years, there's been so much research that we almost forget that sometimes the reason we have an upset stomach, it could be a brain-gut connection rather than I'm sensitive or allergic to this one food item. So if you ever found yourself saying like, oh, I physically don't feel good, but I had this item before and I didn't feel like this, but sometimes I have it and I feel kind of sick. This might be because it's more of a nervous system or brain-gut connection. So the brain-gut axis is literally the communication between your gut and your brain. And it affects like our mood, how we think, and our overall well-being. And many individuals may not respond to stress in the sense of, oh, I'm getting my hands sweaty, I'm having trouble speaking. Some may actually feel kind of content, like, yeah, I was pretty nervous, but I don't have those issues. And then afterwards, maybe a few hours or even the next day, then all of a sudden you have like GI issues, whether that's just constipation or some stomach pain or some indigestion. So as a fun fact, around 90% of the body's serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that contributes to the feeling of well-being and happiness, is produced in the gut. So it's also why we know that essentially if you don't feel well, your gut might not feel well, and vice versa. Going a little further, research shows that a healthy gut microbiome, which we're still understanding what healthy necessarily means for each individual because it's very individualized. What's a healthy gut microbiome for me may be very different for you. And there's even studies that prove that if you literally moved from one state, let's say you're originally from California, now you're in Cleveland, Ohio, that can change your gut's like microbe and just how it works. But also if you moved from a different country or if you were born in one place and then moved to another, all of that has been shown to affect what would be considered your healthy gut microbiome and how it works. But we do know that a good microbiome is linked to lower levels of anxiety and depression as part of the Journal of Psychiatric Research that was published recently. And then there was more research done in the last 5-10 years to prove that connection, which means sometimes too, if you've ever felt like or meh, or I don't know, I'm not in the mood for this. And then sometimes I'm in the mood. Maybe it's not seasonal disorder. Maybe it's just the food that we're eating. We're not actually allowing our brain gut connection to feel well. And instead of feeling physical symptoms, we're feeling them emotionally or mental. So what are some strategies to support some good gut health? For starters, you can incorporate probiotics and prebiotics. This doesn't necessarily mean going out and buying supplements. All supplements that are probiotics is a whole other conversation, but if anyone has questions, feel free to ask. Probiotics are beneficial bacteria that are found in fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, kimchi. Prebiotics are foods that are found in garlic, onions, bananas. This is what fuels the bacteria or the probiotics. So prebiotics essentially feeds the probiotics. And so you essentially can get a variety of foods that can help essentially your microbiome. So a tip that I usually start is by just acknowledging a diverse diet. Diet can be triggering for many people, but the actual definition of diet is just what we eat. So if anyone feels triggered by that, I will do my best to avoid that word. But I just kind of want to get a note that if I do accidentally use that word, acknowledge that I'm just saying what we eat. So if our meals are diverse, we're most likely supporting a healthy microbiome because eating a variety of fiber, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, meat, anything that can help. On that same note, if you are an individual, since I work with a lot of neurodivergent folks who sometimes are like, I like to eat the same thing, I'm very limited, I have very special needs, like certain textures and smells affect me, you can still have a diverse meal. So we can talk about more what it means to have diverse meals, and feel free again to add questions in the chat. So a practical example is trying to just serve yogurt in your breakfast or just having a side of sauerkraut at lunch. Anything like that can help. But if you're a person that is looking at your meal right now and you acknowledge like, yeah, I guess I could have added this one different thing to add on to this item, that works as well. Sometimes it's less about the color or the texture or the type of food, and it's just acknowledging if I even like the food. So a lot of times too, I work with folks to say part of the microbiome, if it's our brain and gut, we have to acknowledge that step number one is, do I like what I'm eating? So even if someone told you got to be eating more salads, if you don't like salads, it's still not going to give you the best beneficial like health for you because it's going to affect your brain and gut connection, and hence you're not going to be happy with your meal regardless. So it is helpful to first ask yourself before you ask about diversity if you like the meals you're eating. The next part here, and I'll give you all a breather here because I know I just kind of went through that a little fast, but it is a lot of information and it's super exciting. So I can definitely nerd out on it, so ask questions on it. But this next part tends to be the thing that most people actually don't know about nutrition, and it's our nervous system's response and eating patterns. So a lot of times when I have my own clients, we're not even touching on the type of food yet, right? Like I just brought up options about adding yogurt, all these things, but sometimes before we do any of that, it's almost like, how are we eating and how are we feeling? Because that is going to affect us. In the therapy world, there's a diagram and there's a concept that's talked about a lot, and it's that picture that you're seeing right here. It's called the polyvagal theory. And I'll talk about that in a bit in relationship to this. So please keep a note of that. But if anyone already knows, feel free to add your thoughts around this concept. So what is the big like overall picture, right? So stress and eating behaviors. When we're stressed out, our sympathetic nervous system, which is essentially the fight or flight response, right, is going to be activated. So essentially, the polyvagal theory says, like, if I'm being triggered or something happens, my body is going to react. It's going to, maybe my heart rate's going to go up. I'm going to feel nervous. I'm going to have anxiety, whatever that looks like, right? It's going to be activated, and that's going to alter our eating behaviors. Whether that means I no longer can feel my appetite, like I was really hungry, but now you upset me, and so I don't feel hunger, I don't feel anything, or whether that means like you genuinely are not hungry anymore because your body's going to a freeze attack. Whenever we go through something, our nervous system is going to kind of just like that bell curve. It's going to react, then it's going to freeze, and eventually it'll go down. So emotionally, in the therapy psychology world, we talk about like, okay, how do we deal with this? Were we dissociated? How are we feeling? What coping skills can we do? In the nutrition world, we acknowledge that even if you might be in that green zone again, your body might still like now be reacting and it's still in that fight or flight zone. And so now you might have some GI issues because of that stress. And so I see that a lot of times with clients, especially when we're working in like business and corporate, or a lot of meetings, or a very like hustle, grind, to do, go, go, go kind of environment. I almost asked, when's the last time you took a breather? When's the last time I was like, do you notice your shoulders are high up? Like your nervous system might actually be shocked. And until you like let it go physically, you might not even feel that release. And by doing that, your body's naturally going to go through that curve. It's going to want to go back to where it feels good. And before it gets there, you might actually get some GI symptoms. So this actually goes back to when I meet a new client who's having a lot of GI issues or a lot of weird symptoms or random pain, particularly back pain. You know, we always assume it's maybe because I'm sitting too long. And I'm like, maybe. But let's kind of get your day to day and let's figure out, are you eating really fast? Because if we catch ourselves eating too fast, why? Is this just something we grew up as a habit? Could be common. Anyone born in the late 80s, early 90s knows there was a huge like trend of saying basically eat everything off your plate. And so there was this sense of like urgency and making sure you finish everything. So sometimes we eat more than we actually want to, or we have this weird guilt or shame with food. All of that can just be a stress response. Or it could have been that presentation you did that made you super nervous and you're not feeling anything in the moment, right? Just like when a lion chases you, you're not feeling it, but it's only afterwards when you take a rest that you're like, oh, I feel this. Emotionally, you feel it, and now your body physically can. A lot of women tend to also respond in this way, but men do too. So it's very common sometimes to acknowledge, hey, maybe my body's in a shock system. If any folk here right now is neurodivergent like myself, neurodivergent, for anyone who's unfamiliar, is meaning anything that is different about your brain, whether that means you have MS, you have lupus, ADHD, autism, bipolar, anything that's essentially affecting your brain function or the way your brain works or is wired, that's neurodivergency. And for any neurodivergent folk, we've acknowledged that our natural nervous system flow is very different. Our normal or neurotypical kind of nervous system says that we wake up with a lot of energy, and then around 1, 2, we start to crash a little down, then 3, 4, we go back up. Most neurodivergents are, quote, normal, is we actually don't wake up with a lot of energy. Around 1, 2, we start to get more energy. 3, 4, we're actually crashing, and it isn't until late evening that we have all this energy all of a sudden. And so the way our nervous system functions will also affect our eating behaviors and whether we're feeling our hunger cues or not. And we can talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the intuitive eating. Looking at the slide though, there is a stat here and I wanted to add it for each slide. About 40% of people do eat more when they're stressed, and 35% report actually eating less. And this is according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And the American Psychology Association also notes that chronic stress is essentially what also leads to high cravings and just like disruption in normal eating, which is also noted that if you have any hormonal condition, whether that means you're in premenopausal or menopausal, or you have PCOS, or your testosterone is low, you may also find that you respond and are craving more carbs than usual. And so there's some kind of nervous system disruption. And so what does this really mean? Like, what's the solution? If you resonated with anything I just said, then the first step I would do before even thinking about what food we're eating or what time we're eating is first acknowledging, like, how are we feeling? So maybe some mindfulness and breathing techniques. If you do catch yourself not breathing, that is a huge, huge thing that we can just work on. And simple practices like deep breathing and mindfulness can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. That actually includes like even singing right before you eat. It'll like wake up your gut, or gurgling, or making some like weird like not sound with your throat. That all literally wakes up your gut system. That can also be very weird if you are like around other people in the lunchroom and you randomly see these and then they eat, right? So sometimes just taking a deep breath and trying to relax yourself, get yourself in a comfortable position, can make a huge difference for your digestion and just your overall mental health. So trying a 3-minute deep breathing can work. It can also help to just incorporate just 5 minutes of mindfulness, or even a minute. This is where I usually tell most of my patients my common saying of, how do you nurture yourself in this present moment? Maybe it's not food. Maybe it's changing your environment. Maybe it's walking away from this conversation. Maybe it's not listening to me for a minute and just eating your food right now if you're eating, right? Trying to acknowledge, what is it that my body needs? And if you can't figure it out, well, then that gives you another place you can start. And maybe that's when we recommend therapy, or maybe we can figure it out together. So again, just some common ideas. After that, I would suggest that we then start to talk about how we're eating. If we're eating too fast, eating too slow, how do we feel? And this then leads into what I would call like intuitive eating and just the movements around it. So I will not talk about all the principles of intuitive eating. And as a disclosure, intuitive eating was created by heterosexual women who also are neurodivergent, not a person of color. And so we have found in more research that any individual who does not fit that category and maybe is a neurodivergent, our intuitive eating will look a little bit different. So keep that in mind for any folk in here. But in general, intuitive eating principles, it does not mean, I know the common saying in social media is like, oh, so that means eat whatever you're feeling and eat as much as you want. So I can eat 10 boxes of pizza and that would be okay. No, not necessarily. So principles of intuitive eating involves listening to your body's hunger and fullness cues rather than following like a rigid diet rules, and essentially acknowledging how your body is reacting. If there's one thing you learn about this whole presentation, is nutrition is very individualized. So what works for me is very different than what would work for Katie or even Pam, who's here on the presentation. So please acknowledge that. And so when you work with a dietitian, or if you decide to do this on your own, it might be helpful to decide, where am I at right now? Maybe we don't focus on movement. Maybe we focus on sleep. But if you're ready and you really want to do things on intuitive movement, then we do know that studies show that intuitive eaters tend to actually have a more healthier labs and overall just a better relationship with food and their body. So if we know it's also linked, that intuitive eating actually helps prevent disordered eating, not necessarily just eating disorders, but disordered eating and more body positive image. And that research noting that we have a better body positivity, or just body acceptance, there's research that shows having that actually improves our overall being and our happiness in life. Then we kind of understand why food is so important, why we sometimes even feel guilty or question what we eat. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to live. We're all just trying to find the right thing to do. So how do we apply this? You can focus on, maybe it's eating slowly or just savoring your meals. As you're eating right now, acknowledge, like, can I even acknowledge the flavors and textures? Why did I choose this meal? What brought me to that? Paying attention to your body's signals of hunger and fullness can also be helpful. So if we look at that picture, there's a scale of 1 through 10. Some people prefer, like, if I had to leave with something, what's one thing I would love to do? Maybe you take today to acknowledge, how do I know I am hungry and how do I know I am full? And if you think about that for just a minute, then I'm going to ask you, wait, but is that like you're starving or you're hungry? Because I'll give you an example on my own here to be vulnerable. For me, and we can use this picture on here, when I am like starving, like I'm a 1 or 2, I cannot talk to people. I probably even have a migraine at that point. I don't want to talk to anyone. If I'm like at a 2, 3, maybe I can talk, but I don't want to talk. Like that just feels like too much. And I'm definitely probably just starting to feel nauseous and I have an upset stomach. If I'm at like a 3, 4 though, maybe my stomach is growling, I feel hungry, but it's not like I can't talk or do things. In fact, if I have a meeting or stuff I have to do, I probably could easily forget that I have to eat because it's still there and I won't actually notice I'm hungry until I'm starving. Now, just like many things in media, sometimes we only hear the common hunger cues, which if you resonate with this, when I asked the question, how do you know you're hungry? And you said, I don't know, my stomach just feels empty. I feel gurgling. Most individuals, especially neurodivergent folks, but just in general, and especially women, but men also do too, and I've seen this. We also have different hunger cues. I named a couple, like the headache, right? The nausea. We also might notice maybe I don't do as much eye contact. I don't feel like talking. I can't sit still all of a sudden. Doing this one email is taking longer than usual. I'm getting distracted easily. It could be an emotion. I'm starting to feel anxious and I don't know why. I'm starting to feel like I just want to laugh, but I don't know why I want to laugh. Why can't I focus? And it could be like, well, let me ask myself, when's the last time I ate? So if anyone has kids here, you'll know that when a baby's hungry, they move their mouth like this, like a fish, or they put their hand in their mouth, or they move their head. Those are hunger cues. And there's early cues, mid cues, and late cues. Once that baby is like, I'm starving and my parent didn't listen to me, that's a late hunger cue of I'm crying. Adults, as we get older, we also have hunger cues, except they change, right? Like I have never seen a 40-year-old man who just like is randomly moving its lips like this, and then I'm thinking, oh, he's hungry. We should like someone should get him food. Like no. They change, so they're different. And they're gonna, because they change, we know they change as we get older. And so it's important to kind of take a moment and be like, well, when's the last time I really connected to my body to know what my hunger and fullness cues are? And so setting reminders to check in with yourself can be helpful. And like new moms, we don't know our baby yet. So sometimes we set an alarm for every 3 hours, and that's usually what the hospital does. I want you to feed your baby every 2 to 3 hours. Maybe that's what you do for yourself. Okay, I don't know if I'm hungry. Like maybe that's why I can't focus. Has it been at least 3 to 4 hours since I last ate? Yes. Okay, how about I eat something and then see if all of a sudden I can do this email or I can give eye contact or I can do whatever it was that you noticed was off from your regular self. So that can be a place to start. But again, intuitive eating goes further than this because it also talks about movement, it also talks about body image, and it also just talks about other behaviors. Now, kind of moving on, when we think about like, well, can you give me more just like tips because I'm here and I just need things that I can do. I'm busy. I have a lot of stuff. I get it. So sometimes it can be, let's think of meal planning and prepping. For busy schedules, meal prepping can save time. And I'm sure at the same time, a lot of you are probably like, yeah, I know. I could prepare a large batch of quinoa or rice and put it in the thing. However, that can be hard to do. So sometimes when you think of meal prepping, I'll encourage you to think, what does meal prepping mean for you? It could be the standard of I buy all these containers and prep, sure, and I cook everything on Sunday, sure. It could also look like, for me, meal prepping means like having a really good grocery list. So just once a week or once a month or every 2 weeks, I really need a good grocery list that is changing and I'm rotating different snacks because I'm a person that when it comes to my snacks and the variety, my meals, they can stay the same. Maybe you notice that's what meal prepping is for you. Maybe meal prepping for you is actually just focusing on dinner or just lunch or just one certain meal. If you hyper focus and acknowledge what it is in meal prepping that you need, that might actually help you rather than saying, I need you to just prep a huge batch of stuff. However, for some people, they'll say, yeah, I think that's easy. And I just need to find some quick recipes that are quick to do and I can rotate those and those work for me. So I will also encourage the app called Tasty and other apps that you can just kind of look. Tasty is nice because it's very easy and friendly to use. That's tasty, tasty.co. There's an app for it, and I get nothing out of that. That's just me sharing information. Another practical tip can be also creating a quick recipe yourself. If you know there's certain food items you like, list all those food items and then color them up based off like food groups and then just combine them just like you would with an outfit and figure out do I like that combo? And if you do, perfect, you just created a recipe and that works as well. Another idea is kind of think of the mindful eating amidst of the hustle kind of environment. So thinking even with a busy schedule, you can practice mindful eating by just setting time aside and avoiding distractions like your phone or the computer. Maybe that is where we start because that will help you recognize like what the core issue is for you. If you find, but I need a distraction when I eat, that's very common too. And that's okay. But then acknowledge what sensory is it that I need? Do I need to listen to something? Do I need to touch something? What is it? So think about your five senses, and maybe as a busy professional, you might catch that's thinking about your senses as if you were neurodivergent might actually help you because a person who's very busy, they don't usually have time to quote unquote relax. And if we do self care, it can even become a task. So sometimes it's helpful to actually treat it like a neurodivergent and say, I think I need to think of my sensories. It's been a busy week. What do I actually need? I think I need to listen to something. So I'm going to eat, and eating is going to be one sensory, that's taste. And I need another sensory to just kind of relax and calm me and put me at ease. So instead of a show or like a reel or something that's essentially a sound and seeing, I'm going to just do a podcast and just listen because I can only handle two sensories right now. And that will relax me enough where I will have energy. And then that will help my gut metabolize the food more properly. So think about that too. Creating a mini ritual before eating can also be something, such as taking some deep breaths, expressing gratitude for your meal, or just essentially helping center yourself. That could just be getting into a comfortable position, or that could mean getting some lighter forks or silverware, things that feel good to you. That is kind of what will, at the end of the day, help you rather than thinking of what a diet is. And that's why I put the image of fuck diet culture essentially, and excuse my language for those who find that inappropriate. But it goes back to the idea of in our society, just like most things in this world, there's always going to be marketing and always that person that's going to tell you what's right for you. And if I came here and told you I know exactly what's going to help you, then you know I'm lying because I don't even know who's on right now. Like I can't see the names, right? Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. But I don't. And until I got to know you, I would get a better idea. However, no one in this world can truly know you more than you know yourself. You're the only person that knows yourself truly. So you can, and your body is, and is trying to tell you something. And a lot of times working with a dietitian is figuring out what is your body telling you and what have you trained your body to not listen or to ignore or to suppress so that you can actually do the life that you're trying to do. And so a lot of this goes back to, yeah, half of those diets are probably going to make you sick or are not meant for you. And so starting at what feels more practical and more sustainable is probably what's going to actually give you a healthier life. And that's even like thinking about what healthy is for you, right? Because we all value health in a different way. And we can talk about that more too if we have some time. But with that, I do want to open it up to questions. I do want us to have conversations. So if you're able to add some questions in the chat, or I can also just talk a little bit more as well. Here's like my contact information if you do have questions. But to summarize, essentially, we're covering a lot of things here, starting from the brain and gut, all the way to implementing intuitive eating. And these concepts can help maintain a better relationship with food, your body, and overall improve cholesterol health, improve your heart health, right? Improve bone health, hormonal health. So I do encourage you to even just take a minute before you start asking questions to think about which strategies or things are resonating for you. What can you implement into your daily routine? Okay, so thank you for joining me in today's session. For further questions, obviously reach out to Katie. There's more stuff this week happening, some that are even aligned a little bit to what I'm talking about. So I do encourage you to look at the other presentations for this week. I also encourage you to really think about if health is truly important to you, because health is divided into different concepts. And if we have time, I can talk about that in a bit. But let me kind of just stop sharing my screen here. At least let me give a room for Pam and Katie, who I just see also pop back on.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay, so I know we have a question about how best can you use these in their work life? How do you think it's best for different individuals in their work life? Obviously, everybody has different work, um, and different schedules, and some may require more, some jobs may require more like physical versus someone who's sitting at a desk all day, but how would you incorporate this?
Yeah, I think so I guess it'd be helpful to know, is your lunch an hour or no? Can you switch it? Some people do have flexibility and they're like, yeah, I can just change my lunch whenever. So I'll be like, okay, well, then why don't we figure out when your lunch should be rather than assuming it should be at 12? We can start there. If you have a strict schedule, though, a strict room, you have to eat here, you only have this certain time. This is the only thing that actually works based off my schedule. Then it comes back to, okay, so this is what I'm working with. What can I do to make it fun? Right. And so that can look like I'm going to just sit in a different way. I'm going to sit on the floor if I really want, whatever grounds you essentially, if it's the position of how you're sitting. It can look like before I eat, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths and just some stretches because I only have this time and I know I eat fast because my brain goes, oh, it's 30 minutes, but really it's only 15. And then I have to do this. If I quickly eat this, then I can do that. So if your brain's already thinking ahead, then most likely you're not present in that moment. So you might be building stress. Anytime we have stress, our body builds more acid in our stomachs. So when we're consuming the food, that puts us at more risk for acid reflux, but it also puts it at more risk for your body to not absorb the nutrients. So you could have been eating a salad or a burger or whatever you think it is, that in your mind is unhealthy or whatever. And the fact that you're being rushed or you're not allowing yourself to just take a couple deep breaths, you might not be absorbing the nutrients in the way that your body should be because your body, just like you're worried about the next thing, is also worried. So it's trying to just push everything, and that can cause essentially loose stools or GI issues, maybe not right away, but probably you feel it within those 72 hours for sure.
So I have a
So I would
follow-up.
start there.
As a
Yeah.
manager or a boss, how can you implement some of these ideas into your workplace?
For the staff or for
Yeah.
yourself?
So yeah, for the staff. So how could a boss or a manager support these ideas for their staff?
Yeah, good question. So I know I'll name some stuff that some managers have done for their companies and have found some success. One manager in their building created this space that's almost like the safe space. They call it the psych room for fun because that's what their team calls it, but it's just the health room. And it's essentially, they took the idea of acknowledging that most individuals just want a place that doesn't look like work. And so they thought of the concept, they put posters up, different things, they decorated that place. And so some people go in there before they eat to just kind of relax and laugh at some of the jokes and then add stuff, and then they go and eat. And it was an easy thing that if you need it, you can use it. If not, it's okay. We don't care. This is a space that you can just use, and the staff is responsible in decorating it and maintaining it. Another thing a manager had done is before each meeting, acknowledging all right, our meeting's about to start. Let's take the first 2 minutes. If you need to take a breath or stretch really quick, just do that. And so acknowledging that every meeting, those first 2 minutes were almost meant to be if you need to go grab a snack or anything, forcing the reminder, because some individuals are very go, 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 and we forget. And so knowing that it's almost part of the meetings And the structure, it forces each person to be like, oh, I was hungry. Good thing I have a snack here. Another thing that has been done is just actually providing stations. So not just like the kitchen or the area, but different areas where like, here's some snacks that we are now investing in that are easy, so that this is almost like there's no exception. Like we know that this workplace, they work very late hours sometimes. So their solution was like, we'll just provide things for our staff to just acknowledge like most people are in person, not telehealth. So a meeting 2 minutes doesn't matter. Like what we actually need is just a space to provide like actual snacks, because most of our employees forget lunch and don't bring it and they don't eat. And that was the bigger issue. So the company said, instead of giving, I forget what it is that they decide not to do, they replaced it with providing snacks in each of these like different stations. So it's like walkable. So there's different solutions, I would say. It also comes back to, what is your staff, like what is the issue for them? Is it the fact that we're promoting a hustle grind and sometimes we just have to, like that's just the life and everyone doesn't mind? And it's saying, do we want to change that work culture, or do we just want to provide something that makes it easier for people to say like, here's a snack for you? Changing that work culture is going to take us time, but we can provide the solution in the meantime. If everyone's skipping meals because they keep forgetting lunch, then it can't say, yes, I can provide food. Or maybe it's literally saying like, hey, we're gonna all take out, like I do my takeout. Let's all, when it comes to food, let's, if somebody's doing order, like we don't mind jumping in. And so having a rotation. So companies have also done that where we all do it regardless. So it's just like communicating with each other, like, hey, I didn't bring a lunch. If anyone's gonna order out tonight, let me know. And then it comes in. So sometimes it's just a flow of communication. Like, do we feel safe enough to really talk about food? Or it's one of those things where like when we go to the bathroom, we just go to the bathroom. We don't act like kids where we ask the teacher, can I use the bathroom? So when it comes to food, sometimes that conversation's just not being talked about. And so just having one meeting to say, let's talk about this food. I learned this stuff in this presentation. I'm curious, is anyone feeling like that? Has anyone just ran to the bathroom really quick and felt nauseous at work? Like, because sometimes just that awareness helps the manager say like, oh, okay, so I am being too hard on my employees, or they're very relaxed and they're not taking advantage of what the lunch is for, especially when we give them an hour and then everyone's like, I don't have time to eat. It's like, well, why? Again, those are some solutions. I want to make sure I answer all questions, but I hope that's helpful, Pam.
Oh, that's great. We do have a comment that this was very informative. And do you have any other quick tips that you could share?
Yeah, I think I did mention at the end of the conversation that I can talk a little bit about health. I think sometimes as society, we assume health is physical health, and that's why we even get nervous when we go to the doctor, or what the number on the scale is, or what our labs look like. And we always blame it back on ourselves. So I always use the analogy, if your car is broken and you take it to the mechanic and then they fix it for you and then it breaks again, you might go back to that mechanic. And then if it breaks again, you're probably not blaming yourself. You're probably saying, I need a new mechanic, or this mechanic isn't doing something right, or they're not catching the true problem. And yet we don't do that to ourselves. We usually blame ourselves and say, oh, okay, I'll get better, or I'll do better. But it's usually more than that. So health is a system thing, and it's divided into social health, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, and environmental health. And so for some of us, we all have our core. Our assumption is that our core is usually mental and physical health, but usually for most individuals, it's not. That's usually the thing that gets the most affected. And so sometimes I've had individuals who are like, oh, mine's not spiritual health. I'm not a Christian. I don't go to church. I don't do anything. I'm like, well, spiritual health is just like what grounds you. Maybe if you're not grounded, you actually, then it affects your social health. You don't want to go out no more. Then it affects your physical health. And it's just a chain reaction. So maybe for you, it's actually social health that it's your core. And so when we think about health, we need to focus on that. But if it's environmental health, then it's like, oh, yeah, it's not really that. If I just go to another room, or if I go outside and just take a breath, all of a sudden I just feel better. I don't know what it is, but my environment really impacts me. Okay, so then when you eat, maybe you literally do need something cool to look at. Maybe you were the kid that when you ate cereal, you had to look at the box. You needed to focus on something. Your environment really mattered to you. Versus social health, some individuals, when we're in work, we're like, go, 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 go. And we're talking to people, but it's not the true social health you want. You are interacting, you are doing a lot, but it's not the type of social health you like. And so then I question, like, what kind of social health do you like? So if you're burnt out from talking to people, but your core is a social health, but then you come home and you don't want to go out, that means when you eat, you're probably not going to metabolize any of that food properly, because you're really not you're not satisfying your core to health. And so then it becomes like, well, what is my core? And that takes some time. And only you can really answer that, because I don't even know who it is who asked the question, right? So I couldn't even guess what yours is. I mean, I could guess, but I might be wrong. Any other thoughts or questions?
We do have time for one or two more if anyone would like to add something in. Katie, I know you said you had a question as well.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to know two things actually. One, do you ever actually recommend a diet to someone? I know you talked about how the word diet is just about the food we're eating, but like, do you ever recommend um paleo, or that someone removes gluten from their diet in case they are gluten sensitive or not necessarily celiac disease? Or do you think that keto is good, or do you usually stray away from ever, you know, saying to someone like don't eat any carbs? Does that make sense?
Yeah, good. Yeah, that does make sense. Good question. I do think sometimes where there's like this extreme side to diet culture, and there's this extreme side to what it's called like health at every size. And so I will also say I have, and usually comes back to, well, if you're diabetic, of course carbs are going to affect you. Like there's an actual metabolic physical thing that's happening. So saying, yeah, you can have this, we can't. But before we get there, we might have to acknowledge what a carb is. We might have to acknowledge, like, how are you eating? Do you feel good about the food you're eating, and finding foods that fit right to you, so you're not also avoiding foods that you do like. If when we think about like gluten, because I know there's a whole thing on avoid gluten or avoid dairy, there are some individuals who can, but the thing about, oh, I have gut issues, so I'm just going to avoid a whole food group, means that now you're disrupting the microbiome again. And so now it's just going to cause a bigger problem on top of a bigger problem. So the common example I give is, imagine throwing a huge party and there's this weird thing on the kitchen floor and it just couldn't get off. But then, your friend invites you to, I don't know, Target or something, and you bought all these decorations and now your kitchen looks so pretty, but there's still that stain on the wall and or on the floor, and it's just getting worse. But you did get new stuff, the living room's getting clean, everything, it doesn't matter. Like, you might be helping it, but you're not truly helping it. There's a core, and it's not until someone comes over and says, what's that thing on the floor, that you're like, oh, I actually forgot, because I've been able to suppress it and ignore it. And it wasn't until something happened in my life, or literally someone who comes in, that all of a sudden it's always been there. And just because you remove that dairy or the gluten, you were never able to see it because it was just enough to make the kitchen look pretty, but the stain was still there. And as humans, eventually that alarm sound, we can start to ignore it. But it isn't until someone takes it out that we recognize how loud it is and how much it's getting worse. And now it's like even harder to do. And now if we put dairy back in or anything, now your body's naturally going to get disrupted. And so now you're like, ugh, I don't know what to do. So I usually tell people, before we think about removing or anything, like, let's start with how you're feeling. How do you like your foods? Are you eating fast? Are you eating too slow? What kind? Let's talk about your variety, and then we might find that it is helpful. So an example of when would it be helpful? Like you mentioned, celiac, yes, but there are other research that notes that a lot of people with autoimmune conditions might actually benefit from taking away gluten. But on that same note, we first have to address what other foods they're consuming, because sometimes it's actually just that one food item that their gut is not liking. And so an example of a patient I had was knowing that they always grew up with cereal. And so they were told to take away cereal because it has a lot of sugar, blah, blah, blah. But when we think about the gut microbiome, we know there's something there. And so we know sometimes the childhood foods that you genuinely like might be healthy for you. Maybe not for somebody else, but for you, cereal actually is like almost like eating whatever you think of when you think of healthy. And so what we did for her was we essentially put cereal back in, but other than that, she avoids gluten, and everything is fine. And the cereal could have gluten, anything, but in generally speaking, cereal was that exception. And that's when we get more individualized, right? Because some people, their foods, that's why they can handle some gluten, but not all glutens. There might be some kind of pattern or background, and it'll just take time to figure out like what that is. But the short answer is yes, I do sometimes recommend diets, but it goes back to like why, and even that diet becomes very individualized.
That's so interesting, especially because I think it is a testament to how you said everybody's gut microbiome is different. So instead of just saying, um, the advice from like a TikTok influencer to like remove all dairy and gluten, it may seem like it might be effective, but that might have just been effective for her or him or whoever it may have been. So that's really helpful. Pam, do we have any other questions?
We do not have any other questions. So Katie, if you want to take it away.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrea. This was super helpful. And to everybody that attended, thank you so much, especially any of our accredited businesses that attended. This webinar was recorded and we will post it on our YouTube page in case you ever want to refer back to it. Andrea had a lot of helpful slides, a lot of helpful diagrams, so we will definitely post that. And if anybody is interested in the junior board, like I said in the beginning, Andrea is on the junior board. If any of you are interested, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out anyway, but my number is 216-413-5234 if you want to text me. And then also don't forget that we actually have 2 other Wellness Week events that are happening. One is tomorrow night. It's Stretch Lab. It's stretching from 7 to 8 p.m. So if you want to do something after work. And then also on Thursday, we have another wellness webinar talking similarly to what Andrea was talking about today, but also a little bit more focused on women's health. So that QR code in the middle will, if you put your phone up to that and click on it, it'll take you to actually both of those events. So you can sign up for both. But other than that, thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you to everybody that attended today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's exciting. Like it's Wellness Week. So yay.
We were very excited. All right. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.